Howdy folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and today is Friday, March the 3rd, 2017. And I have the very distinct honor of welcoming to the show for the first time, Mr. Chris Martenson. And you can find all of Chris's great work over at peakprosperity.com. And you can find him on YouTube at chrismartenson.com. Chris, welcome to the show.
Rory, it's a real pleasure to be with you and all your listeners today.
Well, I'm glad that you're here. We have a lot to talk about, and before I want to get back to something that we were talking about just a moment ago, and that's silver. And how do you see what happened yesterday with this silver beatdown, where silver was raped, for lack of a better word, by more than 4%? There was something like $2 billion worth of digital contracts thrown at it in about a half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. What's your take on that?
Well, there's a fairly complex take on this, but let me make it as simple as this. It's fraud. It's absolute fraud. And it's not just in the silver market. I follow silver and gold closely, so I'm aware of it there. But I can tell you it happens everywhere now because the big banks long ago won the battle. They captured the SEC under Mary Jo White. It's been a complete disaster of lack of regulation. Just continuing the disaster that was under Bush. So this is apolitical. The SEC no longer does its job. And so here's what happened, just to focus in to show how this theft, this fraud is committed. The big banks, the big commercial banks that are out there, JP Morgan, HSBC, all the big bullion banks that are playing in this market, they go ahead and they start taking the other side of this trade, and they're rapidly getting shorter and shorter and shorter on the market as the price of silver is going up and up and up. And taking the other side of that bet are people I can only assume are named Charlie Brown, because they fall for it every time. I don't know who these people are. I'm like, who's on the other side of this trade still? Because here's what they do. They've done it probably a dozen times in the past 5 years. They build all this up, but here's the tell. Here's how you knew it was coming. As silver was rising in the last 3 days before that big smackdown, the miners, the silver miners in particular, were very weak. In fact, they were going down. So when you see the stocks going down while the metal's going up, you know that somebody is aggressively selling those. They're shorting the stocks, so that's what they do. They sell the stock short, which means they've sold a share they don't have into the market under the theory that those shares are going to be worth less in the future, and they can cover that bet for a profit in the future. So they accumulate a big short position, and then next thing you know, the price of silver gets hammered, monkey hammered in the aftermarket. After the physical London market is closed, they always do it then, if not at 1:30 in the morning, and they just flood the market. So there's a normal market has a bid and an ask. Somebody is trying to buy something, that's the bid. Somebody wants to sell it, that's the ask. There's normally a little cluster of people on both sides of where the price is, some selling, some buying. But if you dump enough sell orders in, you crush the bid stack, it's called, right? So the bids are all the people waiting to buy, and you just flood them. And so somebody crushed the bid stack, drove the price down a whole bunch, and then I'll guarantee you they just closed out all their shorts on all of the miners that they had in their possession, unless they have further crushing to do in their mind. But this is manipulating a market. This is the essence of it. It's very easy to detect, and it would be child's play to uncover this if you were a regulatory agency that had any interest in this, but we don't have one of those.
Not in the SEC or the CFTC.
Neither of them. Neither one.
All
Neither
on the
one.
take. I bet they all get big fat bonuses. Well, they can't get bonuses, but they'll have nice Christmas presents this year.
Well, yeah, here's how bad it is. You want to know how bad this is? They don't even care about optics anymore. So JP Morgan yesterday announced that for the last 4 years, they have only experienced 2 days of trading losses. There's about 200 trading days a year. So out of 800 days, only 2 days were losses. But in 2016, that number was 0. No days of losses, and their average take from, air quotes here, trading the markets was 80 million a day.
Wow.
Now, trading is a zero-sum game. Somebody wins, somebody loses. The fact that JP Morgan never loses and takes 80 million a day out of that market Well, who's on the other side of that? Again, Charlie Brown. Why anybody continues to play these rigged markets is beyond me. But the central banks are tossing money in. Everybody thinks everything's really cool. And JP Morgan's, raping, to use your term, $80 million off of customers a day. And it wash, rinse, repeat. This is clearly wildly fraudulent activity. Now, like a really good trader will have a win ratio that's hovering in the high 50s, maybe 60%, right? This is like baseball,
Yep.
If you can just win slightly more than you lose, if you can just hit the ball slightly more than you strike out, you're a good player, right? So to turn in 0 losses in 2016 means there was 0 risk, because if there was even a tiny percentage chance of losing, it's impossible, statistically impossible, to turn in the results that JP Morgan turned in. And by the way, it's not just them. Citibank, Goldman Sachs, they're all reporting the same sorts of win ratios. It's extraordinary. So they don't have risk. You and I have risk. We go into the markets, we win, we lose. They're like, oh, so sorry for your luck, But we're playing a rigged game. When you are playing, like, listen, if you sat down at a card table and you don't know what he's doing, but you're playing against a guy or a gal and they win every single hand of blackjack, I don't know how many hands it would take you, Rory, before you kind of go, hold on, something's wrong, right?
Not too many.
For me, it's about 3, maybe 4.
That's it. Oh, the thing is that list, the Citi, the Goldman, J.P. Morgan, probably Wells Fargo's in there somewhere.
Absolutely.
These all share a common denominator: too big to jail. Period. They are all criminal enterprises, and we've got to throw HSBC in the lot, because these are all criminal organizations that Bugsy Siegel and Al Capone would love to have had. I mean, they would still be in operation today. I mean, I often wonder, Chris, and I'm not. It blows my mind. I wonder if Bugsy Siegel and Al Capone and some of their henchmen of the day didn't get involved in the banking industry, didn't see what was happening, because that's how criminal it is. These are mafia organizations, period. That's the only way you can describe them. That's all that they are.
Well, yeah, what else should we say? If you or I break the law, there's consequences.
Right.
These banks, the ones you've mentioned, HSBC got caught taking drug money, not just once, not twice, but tons of times. And it was Loretta Lynch, I think, as Attorney General of the state of New York then, before she became Attorney General of the U.S. By the way, I think this was how she earned that particular arm badge. She was known to be a cheating player who's willing to rig and fix things for the system. She just charged HSBC with a fine, and ooh, biggest fine ever, but not one individual was charged. They were taking drug money by the billions.
Yep.
And it was coming in special little things that were suitcases that were designed to slip under the teller windows in Mexico, just day after day, just hundreds, crisp hundreds stacked and slid through. And we have the names. We know who authorized it. We know who was in charge of those operations. Trust me, you can't take several billion in cash and just accidentally it just went into our bank. How are we supposed to keep track? Clearly there's names involved. Nobody got in trouble. Nobody got fired, as far as I'm aware, although some might have, but nobody went to jail. Nobody, not one person.
And the thing is that, once again, these are crimes against humanity, because that drug money, it's not for pot, it's not for marijuana, it's for heroin. And heroin is now flooding not only the United States, but most of Western Europe as well. And the United Nations, I think it was in 2013, released a document on the global drug trade. And it read, I'm not joking, Chris, it read like a corporate prospectus for their stock. Is how it read. And it's like, and I'm reading this, and I wrote about it. I wrote 2 or 3 articles about it, because they documented the flow of heroin coming out of Afghanistan, the actual routes that it would take, the number of new customers, the number of new addicts that it would produce, the number of deaths that it would produce, and how it would impact everything. I mean, it was that detailed, and it's disgusting because if you've got all that information, this is just to demonstrate the depth of criminality that we're up against. If they've got all this information, this is the United Nations. Why don't they go to that route that they have identified and bomb it? Why don't they go to that route and shut it down? Why don't they go to Afghanistan with the new Monsanto disease-resistant, produces twice as much opium as before, poppy plants? Why don't they eradicate those? We've got troops there. What are those troops doing there?
Well, unfortunately, Rory, you know the answer to that. That is they're
Yes.
protecting the opium trade.
Correct.
Right? When we came in, ostensibly to go after Osama bin Laden in consequence for 9/11, there was zero opium production pretty much in all of Afghanistan. Now it's at the highest it's ever been, and we own the territory.
Yep.
So I don't know how you put those dots together, but I say, well, there was none. Now there's as much as can possibly be. And by the way, we have these drones that can apparently see a mouse from a couple of miles away, and we're very busy picking off, target A, B, and C, and all of this and that. But I gotta imagine that shutting down a drug route would be child's play. Big slow moving trucks loaded. Yeah, it'd be nothing. We could. I haven't heard of a single interdiction or drug strike like that in the entire time I've been reading the news. So they don't exist, or they keep them real quiet. But my guess is they don't exist. So yeah, listen, to get back to say even like what Wells Fargo did, where they opened up accounts in people's names.
Yes.
Fraudulent. Like if I opened up an account with your name on it and then took money out of that account, I would be committing not one, not two, but probably 3, maybe 4 different felonies. And if I did it in conjunction with somebody else, we'd have to throw a conspiracy charge on that. That's what Wells Fargo did. And they caused real pain for real people. They opened up accounts, overcharged them, and then hit them with the overcharge fees, and all while the people didn't even know it till they would open something up and say, what account is this and why do I suddenly owe $600 in it? And ruining people's lives. Many people couldn't afford this at all. And not one person. They're like, oh, yeah, stumped the CEO. He quit. That's real pain. Like, his $86 million golden parachute, real pain. This is the thing. There's no consequences and no accountability. And the people that I talk to are starting to figure this out, and we're pissed.
Yes.
We're pissed.
The Wells Fargo scam was the actual target was veterans, which is another layer or another black eye to society as a whole and to the American veterans. I mean, it's just disgusting.
It's beyond that. It's beyond disgusting, Roy. Listen, a healthy society doesn't shrug their shoulders and look the other way at that.
Right.
We take the perpetrators and we make them pay. We put them in prison. We take all their assets. We go, some of them might get life in prison if it's bad. Here's the thing. I think if you steal the life savings of one little old lady, you should go to prison for a long time. But if you do it to 1 million of them, I think the death penalty is appropriate, and I think your entire family should lose all of their money, that whatever you've managed to squirrel away, and we should come after you really hard, and you should have the opportunity to watch your family suffering on the streets while you're awaiting your death sentence. That's how I feel about this. I'm just so mad now at the lack of accountability. And what the Federal Reserve is doing right now, let me be clear about this. They threw Granny under the bus. They ran interest rates to zero. They're destroying pensions, savers, the prudent, taking, you get 0% on your savings. Well, that 0% you're getting means somebody's getting what you used to get. Where did that go? That's the Federal Reserve saying, we don't think you, the people, deserve any of that money. We're going to hand it to these guys, the speculators and the big banks. Even though they have record profits, even though they have risk-free trading, even though we hand them money and then they loan it back to us and we give them interest on that totally risk-free, even though we give them every advantage in the world, and they are now the widest wealth gap ever in all of history. And the Federal Reserve is basically, they've stuck their middle finger up at me and said, and we're going to keep doing that. What are you going to do about it?
Exactly. And this morning, I'm reading an article over on Zero Hedge talking about they still haven't achieved the level of inflation necessary to get the economy moving. It's like, what inflation rate are you looking at? Do you not ever go to the grocery store? Do you not ever, have to go to the doctor? I mean, my goodness. What level are you looking at? Because they're saying, well, we haven't achieved 2%. 2% on what? I mean, there's nothing what I'm looking at is probably 8 to 10% inflation.
Yeah, that's pretty close. I mean, my Obamacare went up 61.5% last year.
There you go.
And probably higher than that once I factored in the 30 pages of here's all the ways we're not going to pay and your deductibles went up in there. So that feels like inflation to me. So listen, let me just take healthcare for a second. This is easy. Healthcare has obviously been going up by probably close to 10% a year, maybe more, depending on who you are, right?
Right.
And the government insists that healthcare inflation last year was 3.2%. It's like, wait a minute, how's that possible? Well, here's how it's possible. They only count it as 4.5% of the total inflation pie. I'm like, well, wait, hold on. We spent 3.9 trillion last year. I can divide numbers one into the other. Divide by 18 trillion is total. It's 18% of the economy. How can it only be 3.5% or 3.8% of the inflation bill? I don't get it. Well, this is what they do, Rory. When something's rising in price, they make it smaller.
Right.
It's like, it's like as if if you bought like one bag of dog food and 10 tins of cat food, for your dog and your cat, and all of a sudden dog food went up a lot, they would say, oh, let's just count the cat food this year. That's, because it's cat food, or something. They just play all these tricks,
right.
But it's inflation isn't low, and I know it's not low. So why are they doing this, do you think?
It's called wealth transfer, period. Yep. It's also called lying, deceiving, and pushing propaganda.
Yep.
I mean, that's all that it is. I mean, it's a form of theft. It's not a form of theft. It is theft, period.
Right. And we're primates, so we hate injustice, right? You can hear it in my voice. I'm animated about this. I do not like this. Nobody does. It's not fair. You and I have to work for our money. Everybody listening to this probably, unless you got a couple bankers on here, they're working for their money. But JP Morgan, air quotes, making $80 million a day. They don't do anything for that. They don't produce a single thing. They don't build a single house. Not one good gets shipped or produced. Not one service gets performed. It's just a skimming operation that honestly doesn't even really involve people anymore. It's just computers.
Right.
And so they're just skimming all of that. 80 million. You know what kind of a business I'd have to create that could generate 80 million in profits a day? Oh my God, I'd have to be like 3 GEs and 6 Apples. I mean, it's just like it's an extraordinary thing. It's amazing, right?
I mean, that's $400 million a week.
In profits.
Profit.
Risk-free. No chance that a competitor is going to come along and eat your lunch on that, apparently, because you don't have any losses in there.
That is
How about that?
Mind-boggling. We're right in the middle of it, but I want to throw this into it. In one of your latest pieces, it's bubble time. You describe a bubble in this way. A bubble exists when prices rise beyond what incomes can sustain. And number 2, bubbles always have a blow-off top. With the latest and greatest IPO, this whole Snapchat, not food stamps, in our
yep.
in our latest episode of The Shadow of Truth, Dave Kransmer and I discussed the fact that Snap had a 54 times valuation going into the opening bid. Would you say, Chris, that this marks the top of the equities bubble, or how do you see Snap playing a part in the blow-off top of every bubble that ever was?
Well, no difference. Bubbles always have a story that goes with it, and everybody thinks it makes sense, And first off, let's just dispense with this whole idea that this is a Trump rally that happened in November, right? Can we just dispense with that, right?
Yes.
Because either electing Trump was the greatest thing also for German stocks and Japanese stocks, or we have to understand something else happened. And by the way, quick aside, here's my model for this, and this helps explain Snap, I think. So In January of last year, so 2016, the world was actually looking like it was falling apart a little bit there. Emerging markets were blowing up, debt was blowing up, the dollar was suddenly rallying, stocks were falling off. It looked like we had that third triple top. About 3 weeks into that whole experience, all of a sudden, one morning, everything just, I won't even call it a V bottom. It was a pin bottom and went the other direction, as if somebody hit a button and poured, several tens of billions into the financial markets, right? And then we cast forward to Brexit, which happened just a few months later. And again, black swan, nobody expecting it. And the markets were total disarray. The pound fell by like 12%. It was this amazing disarray. But within 3 days, went the other direction. Let's go forward a little further. We're in November now. And Trump gets elected, total black swan. Nobody's expecting it. As of even 10 o'clock that night, every TV I was looking at was like, woo, Hillary coronation was inevitable. And at 11, all of a sudden, that wasn't true. The market started selling off, but at 1:30 that morning, all of a sudden, that nipple bottom, that pin bottom, where the markets just went absolutely the other direction, happened. That took about 3 hours. So we went from 3 weeks of digestion to 3 days to 3 hours, and I'm looking at each of those events, and I'm saying to myself, this isn't how markets work. This is what happens when authorities who are scared, who feel they're responsible for ever rising markets, who've staked their reputations on them going up, and who have access to unlimited money, this is what they do. And the markets are very easy to control now because of computers. No humans need to be involved. Nobody has to think anything through. They just follow the money. If you throw a few billion in, they'll chase it. And JP Morgan will siphon its 80 million off, and everybody will siphon their little piece off, but the markets will go higher as a consequence. So my model for this is that we are in the midst of a central bank distorted and inspired bubble-ishous period of time. They're desperately afraid to see anything go down. So what they're doing is they're throwing $200 billion a month, billion with a B, that we know about. And I think there's some we don't know about. $200 billion a month is going into the markets, mostly from the ECB in Japan at this point in time. But as soon as they stop, the United States will find a reason to start QE again. Trust me. So that's what it takes to keep all of this sort of up and running. So now, how do you make sense of something like Snap, which doesn't make any sense? They don't have any earnings to show for anything. Anybody who's used it can tell you that this is an older technology. The kids are already migrating away from it, and it doesn't have a business model associated with it. It's got eyeballs. What is this, 1999? Holy cow, here we are again, right? You need to see things like Snap come along where it's just so untethered from reality. That's sort of what you need to begin to see at the top. But this top, however, Rory, this is the mother of all bubbles. This one didn't start in 2008 with the 0% blowout special. This one actually began in the early 1980s when we started expanding total credit market debt twice as fast as GDP. We thought we could do it forever. It broke apart in 1998 first. It broke apart again in 2007, 2008. Here we are again. They're going to try and rescue it again, but it's this simple. 2 giant steps back. We look at it and we say, it's probably a bad idea to try and grow your debts at twice the rate of your income. If it doesn't work for you or me individually, it doesn't work for the two of us together, it doesn't work for everybody in our town trying it collectively, which means it doesn't work for the whole nation, and it doesn't work for the world, right? It's that simple. So we have this crazy addiction to credit that allowed us to live beyond our means, and what we're afraid of is listen, von Mises, the Austrian economist, said it best. Your only choices at the end of a credit expansion are to either voluntarily abandon it or face a final catastrophe of the currency system involved. Right? This is why I continue to advise people the greatest wealth transfer is underway, but boy, it's going to pick up a lot of steam. And the dividing line will be between those who have real assets and those who don't.
Okay.
And real assets, gold, silver, land, you name it.
And I'm so glad you said that, because that is the last question that I want to ask you, and then we'll let you get back to your day. Your work is centered around peak prosperity. You are very solutions oriented. A lot of your work focuses on solutions. Gold, silver, and farmland always a great way for one to protect their wealth, just like you just said. Tangible, accepted globally as wealth, and if you own the land outright, all three offer limited to no third-party risk. Aside from these assets, Chris, what can someone of limited means? We know there are millions of people out there that are hurting. I mean, what can they do to protect their wealth in these very unstable times?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because a lot of what we've been talking about is sort of the righteous indignation, and I do a lot of problem definition as well, and there's a number of them. But that's no good to talk about that stuff unless you can do something about it. So
Exactly.
we have a second book out. Its title is Prosper with an exclamation point, and it's also the subject of the upcoming seminar. We do one seminar a year. This one's going to be at Rowe, Massachusetts this year, April 6th to 9th. That's a Thursday to a Sunday. And there we talk about 8 different forms of capital that people should be building to be both more resilient for some possible ugly futures, but also if you do any of these things, you'll be happier and healthier today. Now, obviously, financial capital, cornerstone of what people think about when we say the word capital, but that's just one of the 8. There are other forms of capital that if you are wealthy in these, you will be far better off than somebody who isn't. And so just to give you a few examples which cost no money, but will take time to develop, right? So this, poorest person living on the 13th floor of an apartment in, Austin, you can get there, right? So the first is emotional capital, really important, right? It won't do you any good to have like all this money and a nice house and nice garden if when the times get tough, you fall to pieces, right? So emotional capital is real important. There are ways to build it. None of them really require money, but does require dedication. Your social capital, very important, right? We live in very isolated times, and a lot of people sort of know people, but we have some advice around how to really burrow in there and really actually get to know people. Not when times are good, right? We get to know each other when we're doing things together, and we get to see where people's edges are. We know what we can rely on them for, what we can't. We have experiences. So trust, to really build trust, you can't just see somebody at a party every so often. You got to go further. And living capital, that's your own health, the health of your body. That's your living capital, but as well the state of the environs around you. I don't care how poor you are, you can start to build your soil if you've got any land available to you at all. And even if you're renting, I used to do this everywhere I rented before I bought. You can plant fruit trees, you can get gardens in and going, all of that. So we go through all 8 forms of capital, and I've given you 4 if we include financial in there. And these are things that if you build these up, you're going to be way better off than somebody who hasn't taken those steps. And by the way, anybody listening who says, oh yeah, when it really becomes obvious, that's when I'll get started, I'm going to tell you that's going to be a super disappointing moment in your life. You'll have some regrets around that decision.
Yes. Yes. As the old saying goes, the time to fix the roof is before it rains.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. But there's people in Venezuela right now, I'm sure, looking back going, oh my God, I wish I'd done things differently 3 years ago.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, because those people are in, man, oh man, we could do a whole show just on that.
It's bad.
It's really bad. But Chris, I'm not going to take up any more of your time, and I certainly appreciate all you've given us, and I really appreciate that end piece right there with the solutions, because that's really the key to the whole thing. We can discuss the problems all day long, but if there aren't any solutions, then you really have nothing. It's just really two guys crying about what's going on.
Exactly. We don't need 2 more of those. Believe me.
Well, you can find all of Chris's work over at peakprosperity.com, and we've been speaking with Chris Martenson. Chris, I look forward to speaking with you in the not too distant future, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Likewise, Rory. Thank you.